I'm Gabby. I'm a licensed trauma and attachment therapist, and I have spent years working with foster and adoptive families. If you're involved in child welfare in any way, I'm willing to bet a lot of money that you've seen this dynamic before, but although it's super common, it's still really difficult to navigate. Today, I'm going to give you some information on how to best navigate working with a child who has taken on the role of parenting their siblings from a trauma and attachment informed lens. So first, I'm going to give you a framework for how to think about raising these children. Then we're going to get into my 4 cardinal rules for parenting parentified children. And then we're going to talk about the 3 phases of earning the trust of a parentified child. So to begin, let's talk about why parentification happens. When children are being raised by their parents in a single family home, this is the ideal family structure for children. There's a very clear division between caregivers and children. And the caregivers are responsible for meeting the physical, emotional, developmental, and financial needs of the children. Cool, that makes sense. But what happens when the parents or caregivers can't or don't meet these needs? Well, what can happen is one of the children sees that their siblings are not being taken care of and basically becomes their stand-in parent. Children really struggle with unpredictability and a lack of structure. So sometimes in really chaotic homes, kids will become parentified children to their siblings to find a sense of order in the chaos. It gives them a sense of purpose and responsibility, and that in turn gives them a sense of control, which gives them a sense of safety. So parentification totally makes sense logically. But here's where you come in. Because what happens when the kids go to a home where they are safe and they have a consistent adult who's able to provide for their emotional, physical, developmental, and financial needs? It logically is very easy for foster parents to fall into this trap of thinking that, okay, well, now that this parentified child sees that I'm taking great care of their siblings, they're gonna step back, they're gonna breathe a sigh of relief, and hand over their parenting duties. And I totally get why people think that, because it's easy to assume that the parentified child would be relieved that they get to stop feeding and caring for the baby, and they can instead go play in the backyard. But that very rarely happens. Even though these children may be safe now, they're still in survival mode. And they will probably be in survival mode for a while. So their decisions might not seem logical to us unless we understand their behavior through a trauma and attachment informed lens. So let's think about context. A lot of times when kids come into foster homes, they don't even know what it means or what it would be like to be able to completely trust an adult to take care of them. The concept of being fully taken care of by an adult can be so unfamiliar to them that when the foster parent tries to take care of them or their siblings, it doesn't feel comforting or good. It feels scary. And their fear totally makes sense if we look at it through the lens of trauma and safety. These kids knew that they could not depend on their primary caregivers to keep them safe, so why would they trust their new parents to do that? It would be very foolish and potentially very dangerous for them to just automatically assume that this new adult is safe and that they should just trust them to take care of their siblings. Quite frankly, it would be bad parenting on the part of the parentified child. Their priority is still to keep their siblings safe, and they do not have enough evidence for why they can trust you to do that long term. Here's a good way to think about it. Imagine that you had a child or even a pet that you've taken care of for years and years, and one day someone just shows up in your life and is like, don't worry, I'll just take over from here. You're not gonna be like, oh good, thank goodness. You're gonna be like, get out of my house. And that's usually how parentified children feel. So we can understand that concern, and we can also recognize that children obviously do not have the skills to raise children. And although these parentified children are too young to have this understanding, as adults, we know that it's not fair for them to have to miss out on their childhood, and we want them to have a childhood. So needless to say, there are a lot of moving parts to consider. So no matter what, we have one goal in mind. And once we achieve that goal, everything else will fall into place. Our goal is to gain the trust of the parentified child. There are 4 principles that are essential to success. Let them be your guide. Number 1, consistent action over words. Every single parentified child in foster care has been failed by adults that were supposed to take care of them and their siblings. It's why they became parentified in the first place. So they're used to adults saying, oh, I'll protect and I'll care for you and your siblings, and then betraying their trust. The only way to teach them that you are safe trustworthy, and are someone who will take care of them and their siblings is through consistent action over a long period of time. And I know that it's really frustrating for foster parents to have a perfect track record with these kids and still not have earned their trust. But you've got to remember that their resistance to trusting you has nothing to do with you. And it has everything to do with the fact that their past experiences have led them to believe that trusting adults to take care of them or their siblings is dangerous. These children are often deeply traumatized, and helping children who have histories of being abused or neglected learn that adults can be safe and can protect them is a slow process. But if you put in this work to consistently show up for them, one day, even the most parentified child will begin to depend on you, and you will realize that even when it didn't seem like it, you were earning their trust. Keep showing up for them, even when it feels like you're not ever going to earn their trust. Number 2, avoid the power struggle. The worst thing that you can do is engage in a power struggle with a parentified child. Remember, they are literally in survival mode, and they will be there until they have long-term stability. They don't feel safe, and they're not going to feel safe for a while. So if you engage in a power struggle with them, you are both going to lose. As the foster parent, you actually do have the power, so you can pull the trump card at any time. You're the adult and they're the kid. But by setting a hard boundary without considering that their behavior and their defiance is rooted in fear, you're only going to scare them further. And you'll lose the trust that they had in you and your ability to take care of them and their siblings. So if you engage in a power struggle, they'll go deeper into survival mode and they'll become even more difficult to parent. And to make matters worse, they're likely still the leader of their siblings. So if you lose the trust in the parentified child, you'll lose the trust in the siblings as well. I know that it's strange because we're talking about children, but you've got to earn their respect for them to respect your authority. Always keep it in the front of your mind that you are taking over the most important job that they've ever had. Their resistance to your leadership is not malicious. If you were in the situation that they are in, you would almost certainly do the same thing. And I know that I would as well. I would do anything to protect my little sister. At this point, their understanding of the world is different than ours. They may have never been around responsible caregivers, and they might not know that they exist. So I know how frustrating it can be to try to earn their respect, and it would be way easier to just overpower them. But remember our goal. Our goal is to earn their trust. Number 3 is to be mindful of the story that you're telling yourself about the situation. Humans create meaning through stories, and the stories that we tell ourselves about situations determine how we respond to them. So one story that you can tell yourself is that their distrust in you isn't fair and that they should have to trust you because you're the person in charge and you're the person who is sacrificing to take care of them. It's true. Their distrust isn't fair, especially if you've never given them a reason not to trust you. And you do have the power here. But if that's the story you're telling yourself about the situation, you're going to lock horns with the parentified child who is terrified of trusting you. And neither of you will win because you cannot force someone to trust you. So here's another story. Instead of looking at their distrust as a problem that you have to deal with, I want you to realize that this is your opportunity to be perhaps the first safe and consistent and stable caregiver in their entire life. That is a huge deal. Think about it. If you navigate the situation strategically, you have the potential to not only give a child back their childhood, but you could also completely shift their worldview by teaching them that adults can be good and safe and that authority can be trusted. This is why I care so much about foster parents and why foster parenting is so cool. It's a difficult job, but foster parents have the potential to completely alter a child's relationship with authority. Because if these kids grow up with the internal belief that all authority is bad, they're going to fight against it. And it's very likely that they are going to end up in prison or dead. And I'm not being dramatic when I say that. Foster children face a much higher incarceration rate. And according to research, children in foster care are 42% more likely to die compared with children in the general population. And I think that distrust of authority is a huge reason for those statistics. So if you play the long game and you follow these principles and build their trust, you will change that core belief and teach them that sometimes people in a position of power want to help them. You will change the trajectory of their life. Keeping your cool and learning how to parent these kids in a trauma and attachment informed way is the best way to protect them from becoming a number on one of these charts. Number 4, do not take mistrust or defiance personally. Parentified children can be very difficult to parent, and that's especially true when we don't understand where their defiant behavior is coming from, because on the outside it appears to be ungratefulness, disrespect, or spoiled brat behavior. And if we saw some of those similar behaviors in kids who grew up in a stable, consistent home and aren't traumatized, it might be some of those behaviors. But if we look at the behavior of the parentified child from their perspective, we can see that they're pushing you away because they're terrified of you getting to know them and then rejecting them. The most painful experience that a child can go through is being rejected by a parent. And even if they weren't directly rejected, being removed from the care of their parent feels like rejection. They don't want to trust another caregiver and be hurt again. So their resistance to you caring for them is them protecting themselves. Children who have been neglected and abused almost always have a deep core belief that they do not deserve to be loved. So you caring about them challenges that belief, and that scares the crap out of them. And that's often why they act out. So if we take their behavior personally, we're about 1 million times more likely to respond out of anger and hurt and say something to them that we may regret. And when we make that mistake, we're accidentally confirming the belief to the child that they're a burden and that their core belief is true. The process of them learning to trust you is identical to the process of them learning that they are lovable. When you practice patience with them, you teach them that they're lovable. Their defiance and their rudeness and their ungratefulness is not personal. It's survival. And here is the kicker, because generally, the better parent you are, the more afraid they're going to be of trusting you. Because if they've never been well taken care of, they're going to think that you're way too good to be true. And at least a part of them believes that there must have been some sort of mistake because they do not deserve to be loved like this. I have had this exact same session with all of the best foster and adoptive parents that I've ever worked with. It's like Groundhog Day. It's the same thing where they're like, Gabby, we've had these kids for a little while and their defiance is only getting worse. And we're trying to show up in the best way that we can and we're doing so much for them and it just doesn't seem like anything's working, like they're just not connecting with us. And I'm like, yeah. So what you're doing is you're really challenging their belief that they don't deserve love. So keep going, because eventually you're going to provide enough evidence that they can trust you. But the more afraid they are of losing you, the harder they're going to push away from you. So much of foster parenting is paradoxical, and it generally always is the case that the more resistant a child is to allowing the parent to love them, the better the parent is. Obviously, that's not in every case, but that's a pretty common theme that I've seen. So here are the 3 phases of earning the trust and respect of the parentified child. Phase 1, I am not a threat. In this phase, your objective is to establish yourself as a person that respects their position in the family. Our key here is observation. When children are removed from their home, they lose all sense of familiarity and they're generally terrified. And when humans are scared, we cling to what we're used to. So as foster and adoptive parents, it's really important to meet them where they're at. You can always ask the caseworker or the social worker for information about the sibling dynamic. Some might have helpful insight. But for the first little while they're in your home, your job is to observe the sibling dynamic. See how things get done and see who's taking care of whom. Watch and listen and approach with curiosity about their roles in the family. When you find the parentified child, let them kind of show you how to do their job. Obviously, use your judgment on what you allow because we don't want a 6-year-old changing a baby's diaper, but don't completely take over. Let them help and let them be a part of it in some way. You can say something like, hey, will you watch and make sure that I'm doing this correctly? Or hey, is there anything I should know about what foods your little brother likes? This will give them some sense of familiarity and control, and you're supporting their sense of safety. What you're doing in this phase is communicating to them that they are safe, and it sets us up beautifully to build their trust. Our second phase is gradual exposure through soft limits. Our objective in phase 2 is to slowly and carefully take over their jobs with emotional reassurance. So once the newness of the situation has worn off a little bit and the kids have settled in, you can gradually begin to take over a little bit more. But you're going to do it very carefully with emotional reassurance. Obviously, this depends on the circumstances and the ages of the kids and the situation and all of that, so use your parenting judgment here. But this is the phase of soft limits. So I'm going to brush his hair today, but you can put on his shoes. Just slowly and gradually accept the responsibility that they have, but let them be included and go slowly. Remember that as you're taking over their jobs, you're removing the thing that makes them feel safe. So we don't want to just pull it away and have a huge reaction. We want to do it very slowly and carefully. Phase 3 is I can take it from here and you can help sometimes. If you followed the 4 principles and have established a baseline of trust and understanding with the parentified child, they're going to feel a lot more comfortable giving you some of their responsibility, and this is when you can make the final transition into the caregiving role. So in this phase, you want to help them understand that you want them to be a kid and that they deserve the chance to focus on themselves. You can say something like, I'm going to help your sister with her homework today so you can focus on yours. Or come say goodnight to your brother, but I'm going to be the one to tuck him in. Earning trust is once again the key here. And it would be so nice if these behaviors went down in a predictable, orderly fashion. It would make everyone's jobs so much easier, but that's just not how reality works. So obviously, every case is going to be different, but generally, when we're trying to replace a behavior, it's going to look like this. Once the behavior really starts to diminish, we're going to have a huge rise in it again, and that is called an extinction burst. It'll feel like no progress has happened and you're back to stage 1. That's a perfectly normal, healthy sign. Extinction bursts are very common. Healing is never going to be linear. For foster children who are working reunification services and have visits with their parents, every time there's a family visit, know that it's pretty likely that the parentification behavior will show back up. And that totally makes sense. When the child is around people who weren't able to keep them safe, it may re-trigger that caretaking behavior because it's how they coped with the lack of safety in the past. Backsliding is a part of growth, and it's why flexibility is so essential. And it's important to remember that these kids started taking care of their siblings out of fear. So when they're triggered or when they're scared, they might have that impulse to take care of their siblings. And when that happens, I think it's okay to let them have a little bit more responsibility for a few days, obviously if that's appropriate. And the cool thing about that is that you can talk to them about what feelings that they're having and help them practice some new coping skills. If they see that you respect their attempt to regulate and take care of their family and do the thing that makes them feel safe, they're going to be way more willing to listen to your ideas about using other coping skills. Parenting foster and adoptive children is hard because we have to parent them differently than we parent our own biological children a lot of the time. But once we understand the rules and we know how to think about things from a trauma and attachment perspective, it really becomes second nature. So I know I threw so much information at you, so let's break it down. When the kids first get to you, trust is a luxury that they can't afford. Practice consistent action over words. Avoid the power struggle. Be mindful of the story that you're telling yourself about the situation, and do not take mistrust or defiance personally. And our 3 phases of building trust are, I am not a threat, where we establish that we're a person who respects their position in the family. Phase 2 is gradual exposure through soft limits, where we slowly and carefully take over their jobs with emotional reassurance. And phase 3 is, I can take it from here and you can help sometimes, where we help them understand that we want them to be a kid and that they deserve the chance to experience childhood. This channel is a love letter to all of the foster and adoptive families that I've ever worked with, because you guys deserve so much more support and information than you get. So please subscribe if you found this helpful, because I have about 10 million more topics to cover on here. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for caring about the most vulnerable people among us.